Welcome! In this series of short videos, we will look at topics for the PowerBasic Windows Compiler. Today we will look again at the form in our application and add an index to allow records to be uniquely identified and edited. This was our application at the end of the last video. We have created a dialog with a number of fields. And once the Submit button is clicked, there's a verification stage which checks that all the fields have been filled in or selected. Then after this processing, the details of the record are added to the list view. What we're going to do today is to add a new field to our form. When you are developing applications, you will find once they have been delivered to the user will usually come back with some additions they wish to make. These will either be because the user has neglected to add a requirement to the list of requirements, or they have been inspired by your application to take it one stage further, which invariably involves adding more to the application, either in the way of fields to existing forms or entirely new forms. What we're going to do in today's video is we're going to add a new field called index. At the moment, if we enter in details of a person who is already on this current staff list, it will be added as a new entry. It will not update the entry already there. Even if you double-click on the list view, it will display the details, and should we make any change to any of these details, it will be added as a new entry. So we want this index to uniquely identify each record on the list view. This will allow updating of the record on the list view when a change has been made. And when the entry does not exist on the list view, it will be added only then as a new record. So let's go and have a look at the code to see how we can achieve this. At the moment, there are 6 columns in the list view, so we're going to add column number 7. If we scroll down, we'll see there is a global constant called LV columns, currently sitting as 6. So we're going to change this and make it 7. This will allow us to cope with an extra column. We also have an enumeration called LV column. This is used to specify a column position for each of our named columns. So we'll want to add a new one. We want to add the new index column and make that the very first column. So there is our new index column, going to be column number 1. So to make life easier for what we're doing later on, I'm going now to add a user-defined type. This will allow the definition of a staff record for each of the fields within our list view. And here is our user-defined type, specifying the index column, the title, the name, the department, the start date, the age, and the working pattern. I've left each of these fields as fixed length strings. So let's now go into the Forms Designer and add our new field. So there is our form. Now I'll want to move all of these fields down slightly to allow us space to put our new field in. And we're going to create 2 fields, a label field and a text box. In addition, I'm going to center the text in the box. So we'll click Center, and we want this field to be read-only. The values displayed in this field will be controlled by the system and not the user. So we will tick the read-only option and apply that. And there is our new field added to the form. So let's save that and go back to our code. So as you can guess, since we've added a new field to the form, there are a number of changes we'll need to make throughout the rest of the application. So first of all, we'll go into the callback function, which controls the form, the event handler. So in here, I'm going to create 2 new local variables. First of all, one for the index, and secondly, a user-defined type called staff record. This will be based on the user-defined type we defined at the beginning of our application. And there are our two new local variables, one for the index and a user-defined type for our staff record data. So in the initialize dialog, we set up the font size for each of the fields. So as we now have a new field, we'll need to add our index label to this list. And there it is, added to the list, so it's going to have the same font size as all the other labels. And further down the code in this initialization section is the function to populate the list view. This populates the list view from the source file, this CSV file. So to save confusion, I'm going to rename this function. And we're going to call it populate list view from source. And we will obviously have to change the function itself. This will allow us to create a new function further down in the code to populate the list view itself from what is on the form. So let's go further down in this callback function, the event handler, to look at what happens when the submit button is actually being clicked. And here is the section of the code that handles the submit button. So in here, we're getting the user data when that submit button is clicked. Now, as we have a new field on the screen, which may or may not be populated at this point, we'll need to pull the information out of it. But we're going to add to this prefix block to get information out of the text index field. And there is our text index field added to the list. So we're going to populate this new index variable. Now in here we have a section of code which currently populates the list view. There's a few lines of code in here, but this is crying out to be put into a new function. But before we do that, one of the things we'll have to pass to this new function is the data that's currently existing on the form. At the beginning of the code, we created a user-defined type. And in this particular function, the callback function, we created a local variable based on that user-defined type. So now we're going to populate it. And here is our population. Use staff record is our user-defined type, and we can populate each of the elements of this user-defined type from the variables we have already populated. For example, the index, the title, the name, and so on. So now that we have this one object with all the data in it, we can now pass that object to a new function. And this function will do the population of the list view. Which means all this code here can be taken out and we'll put this in the function we're about to create. And this will be our new function, populate the list view. It will take 3 parameters. The handle of the dialog itself, the handle of the list view, and our user-defined type, which we have just populated. And the following two existing functions, save list view and clear entries, we will put inside an if block. So populate the list view. If it returns true, we will carry out these two existing functions. So let's now go and create the populate the list view function, our new function. So here we have the skeleton of our new function with its 3 parameters. So our first task is to work out the number of records that already exist within the list view. So we're going to create a few local variables to allow us to keep track of all of this. And here are our local variables. Total records will be the total number of records currently existing in the list view. And we're going to need a value for our index. And we'll keep a column counter as well. So we're going to use the ListView getCount command to work out how many entries currently exist in the list view itself. It takes 2 input parameters, the handle of the dialog and the handle of the list view. It has an output parameter, which is what's going to be populated with the total number of records in that list view. Next, we need to work out if the index value that has been passed in as part of the user-defined type already exists in the list view or not. And we can use another ListView command called ListView findExact to do just that. And this again takes a number of parameters: the handle of the dialog, the handle of the staff data grid, which row in the list view you wish to start looking at, in this case row number 1. We can trim the string which is held within our user-defined type to get our index, and that's what we're searching for, and if we find it, we're putting the index number into this field. This will cater for the possibility that the index is not sorted. So if the index returned is 0, then the value we're looking for is not in the list view. So we can test that and act accordingly. And here is our test. If we have not found an index in the list view, we can increment the total number of records. So if the total number of records is 5, we will increment this to 6. So our new record is going to be row number 6. And we can use the ListView insert item command to insert a brand new record. And we're inserting the total number of records. So this would be row number 6. So just for clarity, we're making the index equal to the total number of records. So again, this would have the value 6. And we're updating the main screen using the control set text command. Therefore, our form will then be updated, having the value put into the index field. Next, we can populate the remaining columns. Now you note I didn't test to see what to do after the index is greater than 1, if we found the item in the list view. So if we don't find the item, then we use insert item to insert a new row. If we do find an item, we're currently pointing at that row. So either way, we're pointing to the row where we can populate the rest of the columns. So we can use the ListView set text command to populate each of these columns quite happily. And here is the code to do that using the ListView set text command. And we're embedding this in a prefix to make the lines of code a little shorter. And we're putting all of the values into the particular columns based on our constants we set at the beginning of the application. So title, name, department, start date, age, and the current working pattern. And the final thing to go into this particular function is a piece of code in a for next loop to set the width of the column based on the headers and the data within columns. We covered this in the last video. This is the ListView fit header command. So the next thing we want to look at is the data we've got in our CSV file. The staff data CSV. If we open this up in Notepad, we'll see at the moment, obviously it doesn't have the index column. So we'll just add that in. Obviously, if you had thousands of records to update here, you would write a small function to perform this. So there we have our new updated CSV file with 5 records, and the first column is the index column. So now we'll look at the populate form function. There's a prefix block down here that's setting the value of the title, the name, and the age. We're going to add to this our index column. And there it is, added to the block. The other thing we need to consider is there's a function called clear entries. This clears out the form of all entries ready for more input. We need to add our index column to this as well. And there it is, added. It will now be blanked out with all the rest when that is needed. So we haven't added the header to the list view when the list view is created. So we need now to go into the dialog function itself. And in here, we have a section of code which is specifying each of the fields in our list box. So we need to add our index to that list. And there it is. And like the other fields, we'll make it fairly small and centered in the field. So the last thing I'm going to change, I think, is in the populate list view from source function. Now, in there, there's a list view insert item, and at the moment, it's using the title column, which was the first field in the list view. Now, that's going to be the index column now, so we need to swap that round, and we'll also need to add our title to this preview block. And there we are. Title is now added as the first thing in the preview block, and index is now used to add the very first column. So have we done enough in our code to add our new field? Let's try compiling the application to make sure it compiles, which it does, and let's try running it. Now I think there may be a problem with our CSV file, as in entry number 4 isn't appearing correctly. So let's come out and have another look at our CSV file to see what we missed. Ah yes, we missed a comma. Let's just save that and run our application once more. And that looks much better. We now have an index column showing our 5 index numbers. And all the other data is appearing in the correct columns. So let's first of all attempt to edit a record that's already there. So we have Fred Smith as record number 2, who's currently on 2 working pattern shifts. So let's double click on that and we will add a 3rd shift to this user. So if we hit submit now, it's going to complain about the date. So let's move that forward, say the 30th, and it will process. So what it should do now is it should update the 2nd record. And it hasn't added a new one, so that's good. And there we have 3 shifts for this user. So let's try one more. Let's change the department of the 1st record, Sam Brown. And let's change the department to marketing. And we'll change the date on that as well. It will allow us to process. And it should now have a department of marketing, which it does. So we can quite happily edit an existing record, but can we add a new one? So our index is currently blank, so we'll put in a new record here. And we'll put this one on shift 3. So if we hit submit now, what we should get is record number 6 appearing. And after the processing is done, there is record number 6, having been added correctly to the list with shift number 3. Now if we double click on this one and add an extra shift and submit, it should process and now show 2 shifts for this particular user, which it is now doing. So in summary, what we've achieved today is we have added a brand new column to our form, an index column, and we're using this as a unique identifier for each of the records. This allows us to update existing records and to add new ones quite happily. Hopefully you'll find these techniques useful in your own applications, but that's it for today. Thank you for watching.
Thank you for watching today's video. Please feel free to click on the link in the description below to discover more videos.